welcome to Conway Hall. For those who don't know, Conway Hall is run by the Conway Hall Ethical Society. It's the oldest free thought organisation in the world and the last remaining ethical society in the UK. However, tonight I want to welcome you by answering two questions about no dust. Why have the event now? Why have it at Conway Hall? Today is another moment in history. At 4:30 in Westminster Hall, Parliament started its debate, called for by over 4 million petitioners who are dissatisfied with the EU referendum result. Why have the event at Conway Hall? Conway Hall is, and always will be, the place for those who dare to dream of a better world. Here in 1943, health work unions gathered to make the case for us to have a national health service. Here in the 1950s, the national campaign for the abolition of capital punishment was launched. At Conway Hall in 2015, the Women's Equality Party was launched. In this tradition of providing a space for those who dare to dream of a better world, I'm proud to say that no dust is happening at Conway Hall. No dust is an experiment, not simply for Conway Hall, but for all of us who are concerned about Britain's future in Europe. You are in for something new and unexpected, and I hope for each of you that it is memorable. Thank you.
So my name is Kate Hammer, and I'm that American who speaks up before she's given permission. And I'm so pleased to welcome you, because I don't know, and I don't want to assume that you feel that there is a crisis, but I do know that when any of us feels that there is a crisis, we need to feel that there are people around us as we determine how we respond. And I believe that one of the ways in which Britain arrived at this point in history was by failing to understand what problems are worth solving. So by providing you with provocation, with insight, with information, and with the opportunity to speak, I'm hoping that each of you is able, as you move from here back into your ordinary lives, to be better able to decide what problem you wish to solve. And it's for that reason that this is not a debate, it is not a hustings, it is not a launch. It's an opportunity to gather, experience together, and to continue the thinking and the feeling that you probably have been doing all summer. We're trying to make that easy for you. And so we're putting prompts and cues in the environment to support your thinking. You'll notice that there are boxes. I don't know why, there's only two, there should be a third. There are 3 different colored boxes in the space, and each of you has notebooks and cards. If at any point you know the words to describe the wish that you have, or the wonder, the facts that you wish to find out, or the problem you wish to solve, please share those in the boxes. And at the end of Act 2, there will also be the opportunity for an open mic. Now, in Act 1, we're going to take you somewhere quite dark. But we've got a vibrant interval that will fill you with the opportunities to shake off that darkness. And in Act 2, it will be like a ladder up towards possible futures. So we hope that you can stay for the journey, but if we need to say goodnight to you, we will break for the interval by about 10 minutes to 9. So with that in mind, I'm delighted to welcome our first speakers. We've got A.C. Grayling, the philosopher, on video. We've got Professor Joshua Silver, an inventor who thinks that he may have the solution to one of the problems that is weighing on the British. And in between them, we have a 16-year-old singer-songwriter. So can I welcome, please, Joshua and Annie. And we'll cue video 1, please.
Hi, Josh, take a seat.
AC Grayling, please.
Video first. Who's working on it?
May I suggest that Joshua takes the stage? Oh, we've got sound.
Well, I was born after the Second World War, but still in its shadow, in the sense that there was still rationing, there were still many bomb sites over the major cities of the United Kingdom. It was a rather dreary time. There was a sense of recovery still, because the war had been incredibly expensive, obviously, for the country, and it was in economic difficulty. And for quite a long time, I would say for perhaps a decade and a half after the end of the Second World War, the shadow of the war lay across people and across their lives. And it wasn't until the efflorescence of the 1960s, which was a great time indeed to be young and to be alive, started to bring back something of the freshness and spirit of life. As I say, it wasn't very long after that the United Kingdom, which had been an aspirant to join what was then the economic community, but had been refused on a couple of occasions by France, but at last, under the Conservative government of the early 1970s, succeeded in gaining entry. And it was clear, I think, to people at that time, because I voted in the first referendum to join the European community, it was clear at that time, I think, that the great project of a much more unified part of the world, much more cooperation, interaction between the different countries of Europe, great and small, that meant that there would be a lot of opportunities. For me, there were some very idealistic things, but always been a great lover of European culture. It offered to be able to travel freely and visit the great cities and museums and concert halls of Europe. But the much, much more practical things about peace, about cooperation, about progress, about the fact that the attitude towards the environment and towards workers' rights and towards human rights, the idea that something was being built which had a great deal of soft power in the world, really important soft power in the world, a major economic bloc. This was something that seemed to me tremendously attractive, and I'm sure to a lot of other people. My fear for the United Kingdom going forward from 2016, from the EU referendum result, is that we do leave the EU, we become very diminished, we become, as it were, the Maldives of Europe, just a set of offshore islands, much impoverished, more closed off to the rest of the world, no longer really fully engaged on the world stage, which for many decades we have been, out of all proportion to our actual wealth and strength. We've been considerable players in the world, and indeed have been able to bring quite a lot of experience from the past to play in world affairs, not always with good effect, but nevertheless we've been able to offer it. I see as the worst case scenario a very diminished, inward-looking, much less well-off society, captured really by a vision of what the country ought to be, which is very far from being my vision. The vision of Nigel Farage and Rupert Murdoch of the tabloid press, who want to see a much more insular kind of society. And I think that would be really awful because of the limitations that it would place, especially on our young people. I think about the undergraduates that I teach, and I think about the fact that they are equipped to go out onto the whole stage of the world itself, not just something limited and local, with barriers that they have to burst their way through by getting visas and permissions and so on. But I would much, much rather see us as part of something much bigger and richer in cultural and political and international senses, and not just in money senses, than we're quite likely to be if we really do separate ourselves off. One of the rights that being a part of the European Union has given to UK citizens is that they are also citizens of the European Union, that is to say of every country in the European Union. They had the right to go and live there, work there, without having to make special application to get a visa or to get a permission to work there. And this meant that with the possibility of movement in all parts of Europe, the idea of the sort of careers that one might have and where one might pursue them and what opportunities lay open before one was a very rich one. And this is something which was of particular importance, I think, to younger people in the country. Overwhelmingly, under 35s are in favour of the European Union. A great deal of the reason for that was the freedom of movement aspect and the fact that they were citizens of everywhere in Europe. And one of the problems that the referendum threw up is that 16 and 17-year-olds who were very materially affected by the decision didn't have a vote. This was very odd because in the Scottish referendum a couple of years ago, 16 and 17-year-olds did have a vote. And one would have thought that in a situation like this, that would have been a very important consideration. So I think that there is a serious question here, really, about the age demographic, because unfortunately it looks as though rather older people who remember, I suppose, the days when the United Kingdom wasn't part of the EU and cherish some sort of, I don't know, nostalgic memory of that, were inclined to be persuaded by arguments for leave, whereas the people whose futures are really implicated here were very keen to stay.
Annie, we've heard from AC Grayling. What do you think on this?
Hello, I'm 16. I wasn't allowed to vote in the referendum, even though I have a lot of thoughts on it. So I wrote this song. I don't think we've been introduced. I'm here representing the youth, dedicated to spitting truth. So let's have a chat about the EU. Let's have a chat, just me and you, about specifically what I couldn't do. They say we've made history. Britain has voted and agreed. Many say catastrophe. What do I say? Don't ask me. I am 16, which of course means I'm stupid, I'm ignorant, I'm naive, and I didn't get to vote, stay or leave. I could join the army, a gun I could carry. If I really wanted to, I could get married. Yes to all of that, but teenagers voting, my goodness, preposterous. I hear them gloating. I know, unbelievable, I have views, but I'm well informed and I know what I choose. The patronization makes me want to lose it. I've got a good brain and I'm trying to use it. My age defines my IQ. My age defines what I do. Politicians say parents vote for me. They base campaigns around teen discrepancy. They use us as poster children about drugs. They say apply your education, but not too much. I am 16, which of course means I'm stupid, I'm ignorant, I'm naive, and I didn't get to vote, stay or leave. I could join the army, a gun I could carry. If I really wanted to, I could get married. Yes to all of that, but teenagers voting, my goodness, preposterous. I hear them gloating. I know, unbelievable, I have views, but I'm well informed and I know what I choose. The patronization makes me want to lose it. I've got a good brain and I'm trying to use it. defines my IQ. My age defines what I do. 2, 3, 4. My future is defined by Brexit. My future is defined by the EU exit. Now you've gone and changed everything that I know because my opinion was lost among those of xenophobes. Forced to live in a circumstance I had no say in as a result of a game you wouldn't let me play in. My career, my life will be affected because when my future was changing, I could not protect it. Sorry, that last bit was addressed to politicians. Just kidding, I'm 16, they wouldn't listen. I am 16, which of course means I'm stupid, I'm ignorant, I am naive and I didn't get to vote. I am 16, which of course means I am stupid, so they say, so they say. I am ignorant, so they say. I don't get their ways, so they say. My age defines my IQ. My age defines what I do. Thank you.
That was excellent. Joshua, would you like to take the lectern?
Yes, I'll take the lectern for a moment. Explain. Can people hear me? I should explain that I'm actually an atomic physicist and a vision scientist. And in my life as an atomic physicist, I have tested quantum electrodynamics. I'm not going to tell you about that. And as a vision scientist, I'm trying to get eyeglasses to the between 2 and 3 billion people in the world, mostly in the developing world, who need but don't have eyeglasses. And I'll tell you something. I think it's going to be easier to defeat Brexit than it will be to get a couple of billion glasses to people that need them. Now, so why am I here? I'm not a philosopher like A.C. Grayling, so it's not really a philosophical question. For me, this started on the 24th of June, when the apparent result of the referendum vote became known. And my first thought, as I started to think about it, I had a look at my passport, which I have here, and I noticed it says European Union right at the top, and I thought, I don't want anyone to take that away. In fact, I thought, I'm not prepared to allow a bunch of fanatics, and I'll go a little further and say people who are, some of them are, well, it's a mix of racists, fascists, fantasists, and liars. They're not all, but some are. And I don't want them taking my EU citizenship away. In fact, I'll fight them so that that doesn't happen. So what I did was initially, before I knew very much, I know a bit more about it now because I've been using the sort of norms or the way that a scientist works to try and understand what's actually gone on. But my first step was to drop a letter to Mr. Juncker. And, well, I'll read some of it to you. It was on the 2nd of July. I said, you will, of course, be aware there was a referendum in the UK last week, the aim of which was to establish the wishes of UK citizens as to whether they would like to remain in or leave the EU. And I went on to say, it's prophetic now, I think, you will also have seen much written about the result of the vote, but I do just wonder whether you are yet fully aware that there are over 2 million voting age UK citizens who are not allowed to vote. I discovered this point as I was looking into the full background to the vote. And it has led me to the conclusion that the referendum was essentially undemocratic and that further, there is in fact no majority of voting age UK citizens in favour of leaving the EU, despite what one currently reads in the mainly anti-EU newspapers and hears from certain politicians. And then I went on to tell him I didn't want anyone to take my EU citizenship away. I sent that on the 2nd of July, didn't get a reply, but that didn't stop me. And what I then did, I thought I got to, as it were, a bit more serious. I posed the question, can anyone take my EU citizenship? Does anyone have the legal power to take my EU citizenship away? So I asked 4 lawyers, and I'll come back to this in a moment, who I knew. 3 of them I knew. Do they have the power? And the uniform answer, strangely enough, was no. No one has the power to do that. So I noticed when Juncker appointed Monsieur Michel Barnier to negotiate with Britain, I dropped Monsieur Barnier a note, which I also copied to Jean-Claude Juncker. And it goes as follows. I said, as I understand it, Mr. Juncker, to whom this email is copied, has asked you to handle discussions with matters which may arise following the 23rd of June referendum in the UK. The purpose of my letter is to let you know it is my understanding, on the basis of the legal advice I have received, that no one has the power to remove from me my EU citizenship, or any of the rights which flow from that. And the same is true for any and all other UK citizens. I'm therefore writing to you, with a copy to Mr. Juncker, to ask you to confirm to me in writing that my understanding is correct. And I went on to explain to him that actually a couple of million people had been disenfranchised, so there was no majority for the to leave anyway. And, pardon me, I didn't really hear very much from them at that stage, but I do know it was discussed within the EC. I know that, I've been told that. So, in parallel with this sort of shooting at the head of these organisations, I thought, why don't I try and find out from the officials in the EC what they think? And through someone I knew, I was introduced to a woman by the name of Monica Mosshammer, and anyone that wants her name, just email me. You've got my email address on this piece of paper, and I'll pass it on to you. She's supposed to be the expert within the EC. And I said to her, by now there were a group of us working on this. I explained, I'm part of a small group of academics, international lawyers and others who have now come together to definitively fight, well, the way I put it was the ugly rise of racism and fascism in the UK. That's just part of it, really. Our legal advice is that nobody in the UK, or indeed anywhere else, has the specific legal power to summarily remove UK's EU citizenship from any UK citizen, or indeed anywhere. Now, and I went on to explain to her that this could be very important for the EU because the attack on our EU citizenship in this country, there are similar attacks going on in other EU countries from the far right. And that the EU should really wake up to this and do something about it. I got a rather interesting response. I wrote to her on the 18th of August. On the 19th of August, she wrote back and said, Dear Mr. Silver, as far as your question on a self-standing EU citizenship is concerned, I regret that I need to inform you that such a self-standing EU citizenship does not exist. And she went on to say that it goes with whether your country is in the EU. So I wrote back to her. That was on the 19th saying, Dear Monica, thank you for your email. The legal advice I have received is actually quite different. Would you like me to put you in touch with one of our legal experts so that they can explain the situation to you? And it was very, very interesting, in fact, because what happened, one of our legal experts, I'll mention him to you, and again, I can put you in touch with him. It's a bit grand to call him one of our legal experts. He's actually, as far as I'm aware, he is the most expert academic on questions of EU citizenship in the world. His name is Dmitry Koshinov. And Dmitry dropped me a note and he said, "Here, dear Monica Mosshammer, no independent status of EU citizenship exists, which is why it is important to fight for one now." Okay. I think I'd better speed up. I've been given a minute. So there's a problem with professors. You wind them up, they speak for an hour. You just can't stop them. So, however, then 3 days later, she writes again, "Dear Joshua, if you have a summary of your assessment, this would indeed be very interesting to read." And she copies it to all her mates and her boss. So I wrote back to her. And I'm going to have to speed up. I can see that. Well, you can actually just stop me. If you don't find it interesting, just say, "Shut up." And I'll shut up.
I think we find it fascinating. However, could we move on and you can fill people in the interval?
Well, no.
Interested?
There are another 3 points I have to make.
Go for it, Joshua.
I'm sorry, you're not going to stop me. No, this is important stuff, as you know. So what I explained to Monica, I thanked her for her email. I explained that I'd now had advice from 6 very eminent lawyers, that I have the support of an MP in the House of Commons, that's him there, and one of the points which I think we must all be aware of, and we must make everyone aware of it, is that there are large and dangerous misconceptions, both in the UK and in the EU and elsewhere, about the referendum. The most serious of which is that there was somehow a democratic majority in the UK for leaving the EU. To suggest that is actually complete nonsense. There was no democratic majority. What really happened was a group of right-wing politicians got together and they effectively gerrymandered the Referendum Act to pull out people from voting who they thought might vote Remain. That is what actually happened. And they got rid of millions of people through the Referendum Act, and then there was a majority of 1 million, but they'd suppressed the votes of several million, so there's no majority at all. And I shouldn't go on, I know, I should try and keep to time. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to now, because this is really important, if you write to me, I will share this with you. There is one MP who has actually written to me and admitted that the Tories disenfranchised millions. He writes as follows: "Whilst I supported the Remain campaign, I'm not disposed to seek to challenge the will of the people, as expressed by a majority in the referendum. It is correct that expat UK citizens were disenfranchised." And in other words, he's saying, we disenfranchised millions, but I'm supporting the majority. And have you got that? Have you understand? Have I made my point? Well, I will finish with the following. So I wrote back to this chap. His name is Sir Roger Gale. I mean, that's the expression of a half-wit, if I may say so. You know, I'm sorry, I know a whole load were disenfranchised, but I went with, I can't overrule the majority. It's nonsense. And I will finish by reading you my note to him, and you can have a copy and you can pin it up to every tree where you live. And here it is. "Dear Sir Roger, thank you for being kind enough as to reply to my email of the 17th of August. I find your reply extremely interesting, but in matters of such very grave national importance, it simply does not serve British democracy to refer to the referendum vote as the will of the people because, as you say yourself, UK citizens were disenfranchised. The UN Population Division will tell you that there are 4.9 million British citizen expats. I'd be more than happy to put you in direct touch with the official of the UN who can give you the information. If you consider the matter logically, given the closeness of the vote on that day, you simply cannot refer to the referendum vote of the 23rd of June as giving us the will of the people. That is not correct. With millions of voters forcibly denied a vote and such a slender margin, the best you can say is that the will of the people is not known, and it is self-evidently undemocratic to base any important policy on the result of a vote which has been arrived at by disenfranchising millions of people. It's also, however, known that most of these expats would have voted to remain. Could I ask you, therefore, to ask Mrs May to ensure that from now on, no government department even suggests that her Brexit scheme derives from a majority vote of the British people, since it is absolutely and demonstrably clear that it does not, and to make such a claim is, to put it rather starkly, simply a lie. I'll finish there.
Both Joshua and A.C. Grayling have taken the very important step of writing directly to members of Parliament, and as you've seen, willingly sharing the content of those letters. I, on the other hand, took a different strategy, which was writing to you, the people. And I invite you to begin to think about the difference between a conversation that bubbles up and that game of ping pong that Joshua is clearly fit for and able to engage with. I think you'll also agree that so far, a great many of us are getting responses back from elected representatives that indicate a failure to think. So now, we at No Dust invite you to begin doing your best thinking. And we're lucky to have with us one of the finest teachers of thinking that I have ever had the pleasure to work with, my dear friend, Ruth McCarthy.
Thank you,
Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Like everyone here and millions more, I think we've spent the last little while being exercised by Brexit, and it's almost a full-time occupation. It certainly is for Professor Silver. I think we need to think about this, and this is a wonderful opportunity. In my working time, when I'm not exercised by Brexit, I do spend my time encouraging people to think for themselves in accordance with the wonderful work of my friend and mentor, Nancy Klein, whose book is actually on the table behind here. She has this wonderful phrase, we don't arrive in a space, in a meeting, in a group, in a pair, until we've spoken. And so this is going to be our opportunity to do that. In pairs, which we can form up now. We've got about 10 minutes for this exercise. We can get to know at least one other person in the room, which is always a good thing, by introducing ourselves first, and then by agreeing to give attention, which is a vanishingly rare occupation these days, when the sorts of thinking that we see, and my goodness, we've seen it in government, isn't thinking at all. It's a kind of exchange, as if each person has a deck of cards in their hands and they just slap one thought down and then slap the next, and there's no integration or working on it, there's no change. So what we're going to do instead is move away from exchange thinking and towards really clear and independent thinking, where we just give each other 3 minutes in which to think. We've got a great question, but you might prefer another one. But this is a good starting point. What have you noticed so far that is significant for you? And so if we arrange ourselves in pairs now, I think we will have about 3 minutes each way in which to ask the question, this question, and listen. And the joy of this is, it's not listening to report back. It's not even listening that you actually have to really try to remember what the other person is saying, because your role after all, your listening is to help them to think. So if your partner in this might stop, just know that sometimes in the silence, some of our best thoughts can happen. There's no need to jump in. But if you and your partner think you might like, that they need to continue to think, and a little prompt would be, well, what more do you think? So we're not going to come in or comment or add. This is a moment to do something different, to help somebody to think about what we've already heard or anything else that's coming to mind at the moment about this enormous, difficult subject. So can I encourage you to find somebody in your row, and if there's an odd person at either end, we can match that up. It'll only take a minute. To introduce yourselves, first names will do, and then to decide which of you might speak first and which of you might listen. And I hope that's clear. I will keep the time. In 3 minutes, you will hear a bell ring. Lovely. Thank you. Amazingly, that was 3 minutes. It may be longer than if you weren't interrupted, it may be longer than you've ever had before in your life to think. Unfortunately, that's true. With the average time we get to speak before somebody interrupts is about 9 seconds. And the maximum we might get in any normal sort of circumstance is about 20. And I'm afraid that's what probably happened to Brexit. You know, poor thinking, no thinking, interruptive thinking, exchange thinking. It's a thinking disaster. So, on that happy note, let's have another 3 minutes. You swap around. The listener becomes the speaker becomes a listener, and you ask the question, this question or another question. Take the time. Yes, we've got Naomi doing this. It's wonderful to be in the presence of the energy that happens in a room when people start connecting with each other and with their own thinking. So that's our thinking time, and now I pass back to Kate.
Yes, would you like to take a seat with Annie?
Yes.
So you guys have talked, you have thought. I've had a suggestion from lovely Fiona, who I've just met, about redesigning a particular part of the event. Clearly, brains are working, which is fantastic. And we've had some technical difficulties, which is reminding you of the apparatus of production and the fact that when the puppets move, we should look for the strings that are pulling them. There's one further element I would like to add to your experience of No Dust. And it's something that is left out of theater experience. It's left out of civil society. It is very often left out of learning environments. And that is the reception of meaning. There is an audience member, each of you is an audience member who is receiving information and making meaning, and that is largely invisible. And I'd like to make that visible. To help me, I welcome Naomi Zara.
Hello. Hi.
And Naomi Zara has joined with me in this experiment around what we are calling responsibility. Not responsibility, the responsibility that we want members of parliament to accept for the disastrous referendum they've held. Responsibility is something different.
So, thank you, Kate. And hello. It's lovely to be here. It's lovely to see you all. And as Kate said, I'm here to be visible in my receptivity as an audience member. So I'm a performance artist and a therapeutic practitioner, and I'm very interested in the power of listening. It really follows on from what Ruth was just leading us all through just now. So today, I'm going to be a visible audience member. I'm going to be down here on the auditorium, so level with you, but I'll be standing, so I'll be visible for you to see me if you want to. And I'm going to be practicing full body listening. So that'll be while the other contributions are coming from the other participants. I'll be doing my full body listening down here. And that means that I will be sharing my attention between what I'm receiving from whoever's up here and how it's affecting me. So I'm going to be present. Now, I'm also going to be present in my responsiveness to what I'm receiving. So I'm going to be feeling my body, my physical body and my emotional body, and allowing what I'm feeling to move through me. And you're open to witness me in that. So it's an experiment. I've never done this before, and there may be nothing to see. It's not a performance. It's just me being present, and here I am. So my body is a kind of barometer for how I'm receiving what's taking place this evening.
And can we locate you, Naomi, in relation to the referendum?
Yes. So I was conflicted in the lead up to the referendum. I felt a kind of split happening in me between my heart and my head and my guts. So in my heart, I just felt the strong emotional connection to Europe and to the principles of inclusivity. In my head, very confused by conflicting information I was receiving from the media and very swayed by the strong, mostly pro-Remain opinions of many of my friends. But in my guts, this was the strongest sensation, was excitement at the prospect of leaving. And I didn't want to talk to anyone about it because I was so sort of ashamed because everyone was talking about Leave voters in a very different way. But I felt excited, but I actually suppressed the excitement. I said, no, I'm not a Leave voter. And I voted Remain, but it was reluctant. Now, when the results were announced, I felt excited. I felt excited about the space that was opening up when old structures fall away and the possibilities of what we as a nation can co-create together in terms of new structures, new relationships with Europe and the rest of the world, so as individuals and a nation. So I felt inspired. But then time went by, and the inspiration sort of frittered away, and the dust was really beginning to settle on me around this issue until I met Kate and had the opportunity to come here today. So I'm here, I'm shaking the dust off of my experience so far, and I'm present, and I'm willing to receive and curious to know how that affects me today.
Great. Thank you, Naomi. So you come here, and the cameras, if you could leave Naomi in peace. Audiences here in the room, you're welcome to let your attention wander. It is a fact that very often when we do our best thinking, our gaze softens and our eyes do wander. And it's such a shame that little children like my daughter are told to pay attention. Giving attention is very different than paying attention. So we've got Naomi working, and Annie, I think you've got one more thing to offer us.
Hello again. I'm going to read a poem that was not written by me. I wish it was. It was written by a woman called Holly McNish, who has given me permission to read it. It's called Mathematics, and it's about immigration, because a lot of not all of them, but there was a lot of hatred towards immigration in the build-up to leaving the EU. So this is a spoken word poem called Mathematics. He says, those goddamn Pakistanis and their goddamn corner shops built a shop on every corner, took our British workers' jobs. He says, those goddamn Chinese and their goddamn China shops. I tell him they're from Vietnam, but he doesn't give a toss. I ask him what was there before that damn Japan man's shop. He looks at me and dreams a scene of British workers' jobs, of full-time, full employment before the goddamn boats all came, where everybody went to work full-time, full weeks every day. A British business stood there first, he claims, before the Irish came. Now British people lost their jobs and bloody Turkish they're to blame. I ask him how he knows that fact. He says, because it's true. I ask him how he knows that fact. He says, he read it in the news. Every time a Somalian comes here, they take a job from us. The mathematics, 1 from 1, from us to them, it just adds up. He bites his cake. He sips his brew. He says again, he knows this plot. The goddamn Caribbeans came, and now good folk here don't have jobs. I ask him what was there before the goddamn Persian curtain shop. I show him architecture's plans of empty goddamn plots of lands. I show him the historic maps, a bit of sand, a barren land. There was no goddamn shop before those Pakistanis came and planned. And I'm sick of crappy mathematics, because I love a bit of sums. I spent 3 years into economics, and I geek out over calculus. And when I meet these paper claims that one of every new that came takes away one's daily wage, I desperately want to scream, your maths is stuck in primary. Because one who comes here also spends, and one who comes here also lends, and some who come here also tend to set up work which employs them, and all your balance sheets and trends work with numbers, not with men, and all your goddamn heated talk ignores the trade the Polish brought, ignores the men they gave work to, not plumbing jobs, but further to, ignores the ones that they buy stock from, accountants, builders, on, and I know it's nice to have someone to blame our lack of jobs upon. But immigration's not as plain, despite the sums inside your brain, as 1 for 1, as him or you, as if he goes, they'll employ you. Because sometimes 1 that comes makes 2, and sometimes 1 can add 3 more, and sometimes 2 times 2 is much, much more than 4. And most times, immigrants bring more than minuses.
Kate Hills of Make It British had hoped to be with us tonight. And she sent some of the findings of the research that she has conducted with her constituency, which are factories that make textiles for clothing, accessories, and homewares here in Britain. And one of the findings from those factories is that while there is a certain optimism around Make It British, the fact is the skills that power those factories, the machinists are largely trained in Europe. And these are highly skilled jobs, but not terribly well-paid jobs. And so a question hangs over an entire industry. Can we get or keep the skilled workers we have while we train a generation of British people to take their place? In other words, there's been very little planning in that sector, or indeed in the nation, for actually connecting people with the jobs there are. So I invite you to think about that as you think about whether the response as change comes is going to be sector by sector, region by region, or whether it will be possible for national responses to be created. Can I now get the three speakers who close Act 1? Welcoming to the stage Chris Arning, Andra Sania, and again, Ruth McCarthy. Before we begin, I bring the apologies of Mark Earls. For medical and health reasons, he is not with us here this evening. However, his books, like Nancy Klein's and like the authors who you'll meet in Act 2, are available from Vivian at the bookshop in the back. The reason that I had hoped to have Mark Earls here was that his work on social learning, I think, can illuminate some of the behaviors that got us to this point of schism and division. Why was it so hard to talk openly about the choice before us before the referendum? And why is it now so hard to speak across the divisions for those people who find that their personal view, whatever it was, differs from that of a spouse or a boss or a neighbor? So I encourage you to look at Mark's work, both in terms of social learning and the phenomenon of copying. How much of our behavior, how much of our thinking, how much of our voting is based on a true, genuine connection to thought and to decision, and how much of it is a form, in a way, of imitation. So please go look at Mark's work, and now if I can invite Chris Arning. Alice in Brexit Land.
Sorry, you can kill the music for now. Thank you very much. We'll bring that on in a minute. Thanks very much, Kate. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name's Chris Arning, writer, performer, humanist, proud Brit, Olympic volunteer, proud European, Remainer, and I voted Remain. Occasional stand-up and bedroom rapper. So what I'm here to do today is to share some art I've created around Brexit. First thing to say is, I'm going to say it, Brexit, it's a bit of a shit show, isn't it? I think we'll all agree. Thanks, Sam, for the terminology. It's great. I love that word, shit show. June the 24th, some people call it their Independence Day. I don't know what kind of independence they think this is we're living through now. I prefer to call it National Shite Day. Paraphrasing Half Man, Half Biscuit, there's a man with a mullet going mad with a mallet in millets. If anyone's ever heard of their oeuvre, go and check it out. Some of the work I'll be sharing with you today is inspired by people like Half Man, Half Biscuit, the great British satirical tradition. And let's face it, there's a really great climate for satire. It's almost overtaking satire these days, the way things are going. Very proud to be at this stage, the Ethical Society. I know Tom Paine, a great British patriot, who was a patriot through criticising the country he loved, was someone that's very, very connected with this venue. So I voted Remain, I leafleted Remain. Why did I do that? Well, I've worked in Europe. I've had European girlfriends. I like Serge Gainsbourg, I like Daft Punk, I like my vichyssoise and my muscles, and I just think that those are the kind of the softer reasons. The harder reasons are that it's one of the biggest trading partners, and I don't feel that there's actually a need for us to have a referendum on the membership. I wasn't convinced by the arguments as to why we needed a referendum. The reason I'm here today is I think we're entering a very unsettling, great English understatement there, period. What I've observed in the media is we seem to almost be entering almost like a McCarthyite period. In terms of people that seem to be unhappy with the vote are being called unpatriotic, undemocratic. I've seen it on Twitter, and it's very unsettling. As I've said, I think that's the kind of logic of the technological idiot. The patriot is the person that supports scrutiny of the nation in which they live in order to do, for the benefit of all. And I really commend Kate for having organised this event. Because I think this sort of environment we're living in, it reminds me of kind of the unholy alliance of sort of good old doughty British perseverance and fuckwittery that we saw in the First World War. It's like, the plan isn't working. Millions of people being killed hundreds of thousands of people being killed every month, but it was the plan we voted for, so let's just go and carry on and stop complaining. That's the sort of craziness that we're on the brink of at the moment, and you can tell I'm slightly upset. I had a friend die in 2013 in horrible circumstances, and the grief, shock, indignation I felt at the way she was taken so painfully away from me and surprisingly away from me is very, very much similar to how I felt on the morning of the 24th of June. Obviously less personal, and I started producing art. One of the things I started doing is writing a hip hop track. For me, hip hop is a way of creating catharsis, of getting out difficult feelings, of making sense of the nonsensical. And I've got a friend who makes beats who put this together. If you'd like to play the music, please. Okay, so this is the sound of Brexit, ladies and gentlemen. Broken, uncertain, eerie, promises very little that you can be certain about. And I started writing a hip-hop track to this track. And what I'd like you to do is to think about the future to this beat. Because I think that's kind of what we're facing at the moment in the UK. But if you can just sort of take down the beat a little bit. My other response to this, and the hip-hop track isn't ready, so I won't be sharing that with you today, but I would like to share with you this concept. I'm going to have the visual up for you today. I'm wearing this t-shirt. This is an illustration by a friend of Kate's and a Remainer called David James. And he has faithfully reproduced the style of the original illustrations for Alice in Wonderland and Her Adventures in Wonderland, which is, I'm sure you all know, is a great loved British children's book from 1862 and later Through the Looking Glass. So, why have I chosen Alice in Wonderland for an event on Brexit, I hear you ask? The resounding sound of that question, reverberating through the hall. A number of reasons, and I've listed them. Number one, confusing, surreal atmosphere. Alice goes down the rabbit hole, and as soon as she does so, she moves without any warning from one scenario to another, increasingly disorientated and put upon by various people that give her orders and ask her questions that she can't answer. I think, since we've hit the referendum, the day after the referendum ever since, we've seen more change in this country politically than probably we have in many other situations. The second reason why it's very similar is that the rules are confusing. The change to Article 50, the triggering of Article 118, the European Union Act and what that means in terms of amending or replacing treaties, all of these things are very confusing. Thirdly, acrimony. Everyone's always arguing. The Red Queen, the White Queen, the Carpenter and the Walrus, Humpty Dumpty, the Duchess, the Mad Hatter, the Lion and the Unicorn. I think we have an archaic version of Twitter right there. Fourthly, most importantly, inverted logic. The Duchess shaking a baby to get it to sleep. The Cheshire Cat that doesn't purr but grins. Mock turtles that aren't turtles. Kings with no power. Supremely arrogant eggs, Mr. Cameron. So we have that, and this is an inverted logic situation we have with the referendum. We have a campaign that promises freedom, that strips us of our freedom of movement. We have a campaign that talks about take back control and reverts us back to WTO rules, with Liam Fox, cap in hand, going to various world capitals with less bargaining power. Hello, why would they give you a trade deal? We have a situation where people are talking about moving forward progressively, yet what I can see, we're moving backwards to the 1970s. There's a perfect inverted logic in the Brexit situation. I'm going to speed up. Language is used as a weapon in Lewis Carroll. In the Jabberwocky poem, he makes up words like galumphing and bequeaths a number of words to the English language. There's a punning mock turtle. And the Humpty Dumpty says, when I use a word in a rather scornful tone, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more, neither less. Semantics of Brexit, anybody? So choice, but very little real agency. Alice makes a decision to go down the rabbit hole, but once in that surreal situation, she has apparent choices like eat me and drink me, but doesn't really know what the repercussions of those choices are, with the result that she goes further and further down into the rabbit hole. 7, bullying and psychological violence. A lot's been written about the sublimation of violence to children in terms of the repressive Victorian ideology in Alice in Wonderland, and I think essentially Alice is the electorate. We are the Alice of this story, unfortunately. And it's a lot of aggression around in society, a lot of fear. And finally, I chose it because it's in the British satirical tradition. Lewis Carroll was a satirist who wrote about voting methods in Parliament. He wrote scurrilous tracts to his Oxford College, decrying various practices of the day. He was a progressive, he was a radical. Alice in Wonderland was actually a break from his logic and mathematical work and his scurrilous writing. John Tenniel, who illustrated Alice in Wonderland, the original tract, one of the reasons for its great success, was actually a Punch satirist. Punch, for those that don't know, was sort of the private eye of the 19th century. So we have a great radical tradition here in both of those who created Alice in Wonderland. So what I've done in this sort of nascent short story that I'm writing is we have Alice Liddell, eponymous hero of the Lewis Carroll story, travels 150 years into the future. From 1866, she's now an adolescent, on orders of the Queen Victoria, who felt tremors from the future and that threatened her realm. She turns up at Parliament and goes down the rabbit hole and meets a host of curious characters from the original tales, but also loosely modelled and on some characters you might recognise from our Brexit scenario right now. In the course of the story, she meets an ale-swilling, elusive white rabbit that leads us into a referendum, is scared by the Jabberwocky of immigration, attends a tea party where she meets a sandal-wearing sleeping dormouse, and where it's always Brexit o'clock. She goes to subcommittee rooms where there's constant fights between Ryans and unicorns, representing the regional splits of this country, is haunted by phantom political figures from the past, such as the Cheshire Cat, and a very complacent Humpty Dumpty who comes to a rather sticky and immature end. Immature grown men dressed as schoolboys who end up falling out over an eaten mess, and a labyrinth, I'm glad someone got that one, and a labyrinth in which Alice must choose between a newsfeed account entitled Follow Me and Troll Me, and ends up, of course, being embroiled in a grand trial of will with the White Queen, before she finally wakes up and realises, unfortunately, that it's not a dream. So that's Brexit for you, ladies and gentlemen. Before I go, I'm just going to share you a few verses that I've written which go along with the short story, so if you'll indulge me. And I've modelled these on verses from Through the Looking Glass and Alice in Wonderland. The first one is after the Duchess poem. Those that remember that scene when Alice stumbles into a kitchen where a cook or scullery maid is over a cauldron throwing pepper. The whole kitchen's full of pepper, and the Duchess throws her, shaking the baby to get it to sleep, and then throws the baby, which turns into a pig. So my version of the poem that she says is, speak roughly to your little plebs. Be sure the news misleads them. Let's warp and spin and twist their heads, and then we'll plebiscite them. Plebiscite, referendum? Sort of. I know you're an educated crowd, so I don't need to explain the jokes. News stream lies, they can't be helped. They'll lap them up, accept them. They're all too busy earning a crust, too busy with work to check them. The Jabberwocky poem, immigration, the Jabberwocky of this country's Leave campaign. This immigration monster wheeze is most congenial for terror. This Jabberwock's a sponsored feed, they'll cross out leave in error. Okay. Tweedledum. Cripes, crikey, border dash piffle, PC brigade, unservile and civil, stuff the darkies, wogs and chinks. One of these days I'll be world king. Slightly uncomfortable laughter there, fair enough. Was a bit on the edge there. A And two last poems. The White Queen. Brexit means Brexit to me. The people have spoken, you see. So we must knuckle down and expedite leave. I don't give a fig for your sovereignty. Parliamentary approval's a bothersome flea, but with no opposition, we'll do as we please. To remain is now treason. The French call me Therese, but you can just call me Your Excellency. Finally, this little ditty. So you remember in the final scene of Alice in Wonderland, there's a trial. The Knave of Hearts is on trial for stealing tarts, and the jury's crazy, and Alice ends up growing bigger than the courtroom. But at one point, the Queen says, "Sentence first, verdict afterwards." That encapsulates the inverted logic of Brexit. My final poem. Brexit first, discern it afterwards. Sentence first, verdict afterwards. Mendacious dirt tends towards artifice. Tempted first, repent it afterwards. Septic first, burdensome afterwards. Inept at first, then absurd and laughable. Pathetic herd, there's no Spartacus. Yes, I have some duties. Typical narcissist, gets off stage once the applause starts. I need to introduce the next speaker, who I met before in the interval and before the event, which is Andra Sanea, who's written a fantastic blog post, which has gone viral, and it's entitled "When the World Turns Upside Down." So please give a great round of applause for Andra.
Everybody, thank you so much for, does this work? Yeah, it's not obvious to me. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I think I'm here to represent the EU immigrant, I'm not sure. It seems that many people are scared of people like me. It's an idea I didn't get used with yet, and I hope I will not get used to. I would like to share with you a personal story, or at least I thought I wrote it as a personal story. So 1 week after the referendum, my mind was going on, and it took me really to Romania in the 90s, 89, 90s. And I was thinking, what is going on? How this could be? I'm in very different situations. Why I find myself transported in time in such a way? So I sat down at my kitchen table, and I wrote a post, "When the World Turns Upside Down." And to my surprise, this post went viral, not only in UK, but also in Spain, which apparently have a cat seat or something like that for Catalonia, and to many countries in Latin America. And I was thinking, okay, this post is about me trying to clarify what these situations have in common. And what I was surprised to find out is that in both situations, those in power decided to stage a highly unusual event. So in my country, revolution, here a referendum, with the intention to change fundamentally the way the country functions. It doesn't matter what the state A is, where the country is, and where do you want to take it to state B. What I found also was in common were the method of mass manipulation. And I was very much used with this method of mass manipulation from before '89 and also afterwards. Because I don't have much time, I will tell you only about the Romanian part of the story, and I'm sure you will see the similarities. So both events found me in front of the TV, and I stayed there for hours. I normally don't watch TV much, or at least not for hours. And I realized how powerful is such an unusual story being delivered to the whole population at once. Everybody goes almost in a hallucination state out of there. This is how most people remember the Romanian Revolution, the army, together with people on the streets, taking the power from the communist power structures. However, this is how I remember it, because more than 1,000 people died then, and I carried for a long time a terrible sense of guilt that I'm still alive, and these people died for my freedom. What I found out only late was that only 162 of them died in the fight against the dictator in power. And a staggering 942 died in order to legitimate the new power structures, which took the power without being elected. So the appearance of legitimacy was very important to them. So who took the power? These guys took the power. So what I also learned later, they held all their lives very high position in the communist structures, and they had important links to Moscow. They had 5 months to win the elections, and they didn't spare any lies and any manipulation methods to obtain this. They gained the power with an amazing and unbelievable 85%. So what happened, actually? Those in power stayed in power. The illusion of a desired and populist change was achieved. A mandate was fabricated. They were acting legitimately. This is how we ended up after Brexit, in my view. So what did they do in the next 5 months? Because this is what I think it's very important for us to understand. So we were not asleep. We were not a nation of complete idiots, trust me. There were demonstrations all over the country for months. However, they were not in the media. They were not covered by the media, so you knew what's happening only if you were there. Also, ethnical hate conflicts were engineered here and there in areas where people lived in peace all the time. So emphasizing the foreigner, the other, was important even in a country like Romania, where we are 3 nationalities living in peace forever. So what our president did, created another division, because it's good to divide the nation, always, it works. So he called the miners to come and stop the demonstrations, the student demonstration in Bucharest. And they came, and this is what they did. So for 3 days, this is how the streets in Bucharest looked like. Somehow I was there, and I escaped unharmed physically, but I was literally there. So what happened during these 5 months? And this is what I found in common with what was happening here. And I'm sure you will find the events in the past few months which tell you that this is what is going on. The division between the capital and the rest of the country is emphasized and is becoming stronger. The division between the elites doesn't matter how these elites are defined, if they exist, if they don't exist. Let's fake them if they don't exist, but there is an antagonism with the working class. The division between generations, the old generation and the younger generation, the division between ethnic majority and minorities, the protests in the country were always considered violent, undemocratic, and they were not covered by mainstream media. What else happened that was not here? It was creating the illusion of a glorious past. And trust me, you can fabricate this out of nothing, and for whatever reasons that I don't understand, it's always a story that people jump on, including now, here. So these mechanisms are universal. What happened, actually? We missed the train. So we had 5 months, honestly, And when these guys took the power, they didn't leave it for many years, 20 years or maybe more. What they established, the regime they established, was corruption, actually, in one word. I'll show you how corruption looks like. Industry destroyed, petrol fields sold, forests disappeared, mountains have been literally shaved. Migration continues since then. I want you to read this message. This is 26 years after, only last year in November when a government was again thrown out. This guy probably is my generation, and 26 years later he writes, he carries that message. Our dearest children, please forgive us. We were in the wrong for 26 years. Only you can overcome corruption. We are proud of you, Mom and Dad. It could be me there, but most importantly, it's how you think about yourself and how you will talk years from now on about what followed after Brexit. My advice, or what I think, or what I've learned from watching other countries going through upheaval, if we remain or we leave, things will change. Once, because the divisions which were carved now are very difficult to heal. And second, because every day of uncertainty is important for the businesses in this country, and many of them will decide to leave. A balance of a system is fragile, and democracy is a complex system. Once you overcome a balance, the system becomes unpredictable. The balance is something to be cherished, it's not something boring. There is a window of opportunity to act, and I don't know how big is this window of opportunity, but please fight for your rights. Do not give up. Please do not get bored. And do not go numb to the political discourse. Thank you very much.
What problems you might solve. We think best in the presence of really clear information. And I think we've already had both information and stimulation to new thinking about Brexit. I know I certainly have. And I'm standing here now because I'm Irish. This morning, I woke up on the wild west coast of County Mayo. And it's not actually in the picture. I did that deliberately because I really wanted us to look at the subject of this. I am no political expert. If I say something you don't agree with, that's just fine. But I love my country of origin. I left it when I was 21 to come and live here. I met and married my English husband, Stephen, who's here, and stayed here without making that great decision to emigrate. That's easier to do because I'm Irish. I'm always going to be an EU citizen, I think. And it's easy because of this extraordinary relationship on this island, which was a whole country under British rule until 1921. And then the 26 counties that form the Republic of Ireland, of which I am a citizen, were separated by law from the other 6. And that's what we're looking at there. And so there is a border. There always was. And in 1923, they settled on a common trade agreement, which meant that when I was a child, growing up in Dublin in the 50s and 60s, we would get into my father's car and we would drive just over the border to Newry to see my father's godmother. And we would drive on the shabby old roads that were Dublin, Ireland. Some of you may know this, in the 50s and 60s, very impoverished. And we would arrive at the border just before Newry and immediately know we were entering a new country because the roads were beautiful And the street furniture was amazing, and the post boxes were red, and my, whatever she was, great godmother would give us different money. And it was all sterling, but it looked different, to go and buy opal fruits, which were exotic beyond a child's dream. We couldn't get them in Dublin. And so it was a very different place, and it still is. And it was part of my childhood. And that was a soft border. We would stop sometimes, no passports, just stop, have a chat with whoever was there on the main road, and go on again. And then in the 70s, when I was a student in Dublin, and going up to play sport at Queen's University in Belfast and other things, everything had changed. Because, of course, we had the terrible civil unrest that became the Troubles. It became, I don't want to exaggerate, but in Belfast and other parts, like a war zone, and the border was a hard border. And you were stopped, and out of the car sometimes, boot open, checked, and on. And so my experience, as would be the experience of anyone going through a hostile border, is of the kind of anxiety, there's going to be something found wrong, the nervousness that's engendered, just because you're at a border. And then, in 1998, through the extraordinary courage and compassion of the people who gave up what they might have thought was their call for justice, for peace and reconciliation instead, we had the Good Friday Agreement. And the border remained in place, to some extent, until 2005. And now we're in 2016. So this is really close history. This is not long established. And so my concern, what I'm wondering is, how can we be sure that there won't be another border? There are a lot of people who think there will be. Because for a start, if and when, the Northern Ireland, who voted to stay, by the way, by 56%, if it does happen and there's a hard Brexit, there'll be goods travelling, but there always were, actually. In my time, they smuggled butter and bacon and children's clothes. And just talking conversation in Mayo yesterday, they're still doing lots of exchange on what's more, a seller's market. But that's innocent stuff, in a way. What's much more concerning is what will happen if there's a military presence, a police presence, what might rev up again in the uneasiness of tribal memories. That's very powerful on this small island. So I'm wondering, how can we, in this group, we in the wider world, understand how to maintain and sustain this precious, hard-won peace, and to make sure it's not threatened by a hard border? I don't think that any of the Brexiteers gave 2 seconds of proper thinking to what this means. But the people of Northern Ireland are very concerned. The Republican community obviously welcomes the possibility of a united Ireland through remaining in the EU. That plays nicely to them. I believe perhaps the unionist majority might have voted, and a large number might have voted out in order to make sure of staying within the UK. So it's a very volatile situation. We can't take any of it for granted. And so I'm wondering. And so I'm really interested to know, and would love to talk to any of you who might know more in the interval about what you think we can do. That's my question, to sustain this hard-won, important peace on the island of Ireland, whose border, I want to point out, is 499 kilometres long. And the only way you know as you cross this wonderful terrain that's farmland and people's houses and backyards, and the border goes through the most extraordinary places, the only way you actually know you've crossed, mainly, is because the signs change from kilometres to miles, or miles to kilometres. My prayer really is that we can keep it that way. Your ideas are very welcome. Thank you.
The final contribution in this act is Johnny Walker, who sang you in. Here to talk and possibly sing Yeats's The Second Coming.
Those who know me well know that I'm not very good with mic stands. I got this mic stand given to me yesterday by somebody who watched my last mic stand break on a live Facebook feed. So I am the son of an Anglican priest, a Canadian mother, so I'm one of those lucky people who has a Canadian passport, although if Trump wins, that's a bit proximitous. In 1989, my dad took up a post as the Anglican chaplain in Asunción in Paraguay at the English-speaking congregation, and we arrived there 6 weeks after the overthrow of a fascist dictator, General Alfredo Stroessner, who ruled the country abjectly for 35 years. I mentioned that only in passing. It's great to be back in Camden because I did a bit of a circuitous route in life. I started doing a politics degree at Durham University when I was 20. I started busking to make ends meet at the end of Freshers' Week. And I dropped out of Durham not once, but actually twice. And I became a professional busker and a musician. And in 2012, I set up something called the Keep Streets Live campaign to oppose the criminalisation of spontaneous street culture. That was in Liverpool. We won in Liverpool. I actually came to Camden in 2013 because Camden Council actually have criminalised spontaneous street performance, actually unlawful to play an instrument in the street or sing without a council-approved licence. There's a fine of £1,000 for breaking that law. They have the right to seize your instruments and to sell them to pay the fine after 28 days. That power is now being used by Camden councillors. We went to the High Court, myself, Mark Thomas, Billy Bragg, Bill Bailey, a lot of other people protested on the streets of Camden against this bizarre law. We challenged it in the High Court. We lost, we went to the Court of Appeal, and we were denied the right to appeal. There was an exemption for services for music that was part of a religious service. So we did set up a secular church called the Church of the Holy Gazoo, and we called it the Gazoo because the gazoo is a wind instrument, and wind instruments, along with percussion instruments and amplifiers, were specifically banned. And we thought it might be quite intimidating to think that your instrument might be seized by a council bureaucrat or a police officer, but a gazoo with a resale value of perhaps 25 pence would be not great use to resell. So we set up the Citizens Gazoo Orchestra and then the Church of the Holy Gazoo, and told our buskers that if they're challenged by a council bureaucrat to say, well, this busking performance is an expression of my religious worship in the Church of the Holy Gazoo, the only requirement for membership is a desire to express yourself musically. Our songbook is every piece of music ever written and yet to be written. And I mentioned that again only in passing because the whole basis of our campaign, of our appeal, was to the right of freedom of expression enshrined in the Human Rights Act, the European Convention on Human Rights, which British jurists and in the post-war period were very key in drawing up. And I know that that's not directly related to the EU, but I really did and do take my European citizenship very, very seriously. And having done a lot of campaigning via social media for the Keep Streets Live campaign, which I also use for my busking, I have attracted quite a large following of people. And I use that page mainly for just campaigning on the Keep Streets Live to oppose the criminalisation of homelessness, street culture, busking. And I was doing my final exams in June because I've now graduated in a humanities degree 16 years later. I graduated this summer, picking up the baton from Durham 16 years later. And that was on the 3rd of June. And from the 9th of June, I just got this burning feeling inside the pit of my stomach, saying something ugly is going on in the country. And it was kind of a very silly thing. It was like the avatars of people following me. It was a soldier with his head in his hands saying they don't know what they're doing, implying that the British soldiers who died in World War II did it to free us from the yoke of European tyranny. So I'm rather thrown that have I gone on for that long already? I've got 1 minute left. A week before Brexit, miles only away from where I live. I was out in Leeds, and ambulances were heard. And Joe Cox was gunned down in the street on a day that Farage stood in front of a poster of refugees who, in any event, wouldn't be able to come here because we have a secure border, and they wouldn't have had freedom of movement to come here, with the sign breaking point. And a mother of 2 young children, and I have 2 young children, 3 and 1, was gunned down in the streets of Birstall and killed. And I spent that was the weekend before Brexit, and I was trying to explain to people, a lot of them left-wing people, who were voting for this progressive exit from the EU. How's that going, folks? I said that this is going to embolden every single far-right group in the country and in the world. Trump, Le Pen, and I just sensed this complacency and this moral blindness that I couldn't penetrate with reason. And it frightened me, and it does frighten me, and I had a sickening feeling as I watched, well before Corbyn lamentably called for Article 50 to be invoked now, and before Cameron had come up to give his brief and pathetic speech and resign, Farage, with his henchmen behind him, saying, "We've taken back our country," without a shot being fired. Well, there was a shot that was fired, and it took a young mother. And I thought, we've been the victims of a coup. This is a coup d'etat, in a way, linking back to Paraguay. And I really struggled with how to respond, because initially there was an impulse that was like, well, the working class have spoken, and they're voiceless, and the post-industrial wastelands, we need to listen to them, and we need to accommodate ourselves to this, even though it's so unreasonable. But thanks to the community that's been brought together partly around this event and through social media, I've thought, no, the incoherence of this, the immorality of this, the dishonesty of this, it needs to be challenged. It must be challenged democratically, constitutionally, through reason. And that's what I hope we can galvanize each other to do. And around the impetus for, well, whatever deal David Davis and Liam Fox and Theresa May managed to get, why should we be denied a decision on whether we accept that or not, or whether we decide to remain with reform? So I'm now going to finish with a poem that kept rising up to my consciousness throughout this period in June, that I couldn't shake off. That I think is a poem for many different times, but it's a poem for this time. I'm going to do it to a bit of music, and it's The Second Coming by W.B. Yeats, written, published I think in 1921, in between the 2 great wars. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are the words out when a vast image troubles my sight. A waste of desert sand, a shape with lion body and the head of a man. A gaze blank and pitiless as the sun is moving its slow thighs, while all about it, wind shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born.
We now turn over the power to navigate to you. It is your interval to spend as you wish with one another. On this side of the gallery, Katz and Anne will be having a conversation about technology and democracy, while on this side, Alex Farrow will be having a conversation about the weariness of campaigning and advocating for youth. David Welsh will be outside talking about tactical voting with his organization Votes for Europe. And you can definitely get the end of Joshua's story if you meet him at the Circle at the bar. You're welcome to stay here as well. We'll be having a 15-minute photo loop produced by Jess Hurd that takes us from the refugee camps in Calais through the protests around immigration, the referendum, and the marches for Europe, and all the way to Saturday night and the vigil in Harlow. But we hope that you give your bodies a break, you visit the lavatories, you enjoy the open bar, and if you're thinking ahead about what kind of coffee date you might have, there are sign-up sheets along these pews if you'd like to offer yourself the opportunity to meet with a stranger who is here in a kind of randomized coffee trial. Whatever you do with your time and wherever your attention goes, please use it to keep the dust from settling. And Salima will call you back when it's time to start Act 2. Thank you all, and our authors will be at the table with Vivian and the books. Thank you.
Please listen out for announcements so that you can come back to the main hall if you're carrying out activities up in the gallery. Take time to get a drink from the bar and have a health break, as Kate has said. For those of you who need to say goodnight now, we really thank you for joining us. Before you leave, please take a moment to leave a comment in one of the boxes, either on the stage or at the back of the hall. And Vivian from Newham Books, please visit her table at the back. She'll be here till the end of the interval. Enjoy. We'll call you back in about 25 minutes. Could Katz Keeley please go to the technical desk at the back of the main hall? Katz. And Act 2 will be resuming in the next 4 minutes, so please come and take your seats in the main hall. Take anyone you like. ask you to take your seats in the main hall? Thank you. We're about to start in 1 minute.
One, two. One, two. Can I ask you to take your seats, please? There will be a chance to talk again, many chances, but for now, excuse me, can everyone take their seat? We need to start. This is one of my songs. I was talking to Kate about my contribution, and I said I'd like to do one of my songs that I wrote a couple of years ago, but it seemed to fit the times. It's called Weary Pilgrim. And I wrote it in my dad's old church, which is a 900-year-old Norman chapel in a Yorkshire village called Carverley, juxtaposed between a graveyard and a primary school. And I had a gig on the Friday, and I hadn't finished writing all my songs, so I stayed up to 3 a.m. and read the book of Job. And the echoes in an ancient graveyard beckon you to sleep. Teardrops on a lonely playground gather in the deep. And I came to see you. You wouldn't stay. I wanted you near me, 'cause I'm going away. The crying of an aging jester, running out of jokes. See him smile with endless sorrow, laughing as he chokes. And I came to see him. He wouldn't stay. I wanted you near me, 'cause I'm going away. We'll be going home. We'll be there before the morning comes, like children all alone. the emptiness of this age dawning and carrying me to familiar beginnings when all our work is done. Listen for the ageless longings. If you have ears to hear, lightning flashes in the desert, thunder drawing near, pouring rivers into nothing, the water drains away. Lifeless phantom, weary pilgrims at the ending of the day. And I came to see you, you wouldn't stay. I wanted you near me, 'cause I'm going away. I wanted you near me, 'cause I'm going. We'll be going home. We'll be there before the morning comes, like children all alone. The emptiness of this age dawning and carrying me to familiar beginnings when all our work is done. We'll be going home. We'll be there before the morning comes, like children all alone. The emptiness of this age dawning and carrying me to familiar beginnings when all our work is done.
One of the ways in which this event became possible was through Twitter. And one of the things that I've learned in my summer on Twitter is how much a faceless, disembodied person can raise the levels of cortisol streaming through my body because of what they say to me or another. And some of the people who are in this room are people who are, like me, working on trying to find strategies of engaging across difference where the cortisol diffuses. And I think that's why I'm so curious about responsibility and making the body's responses legible. So Naomi, in that spirit, can you just, for a very few minutes, share with us what your responses to No Dust have been?
It was a really interesting experience for me to do this experiment. The first thing that I noticed was that including my body in my experience helped me to remain present to other people's contributions for longer than it may normally do. So that was great. And the things that really, the moments of that were really powerful, I felt were, well, immediately when Annie was reading the Holly McNeish poem, my body was doing this movement, and it felt like this divisiveness, this aggression that was coming through the poem, and it's like the poem was was trying to break that down, but it was somehow in there, this distance. When Andra was speaking about the experience in Romania, it was, I didn't move very much, but it just landed it was landing in my body in a very powerful way. I noticed that my right arm was doing a lot of movement until when Ruth was speaking, she named, there was this moment where she opened out to everybody here, what can we do to prevent civil unrest in Northern Ireland again? And that was something about immediately the moment of opening out, my left arm just went ting, and it felt like a positive opening. The last part was when Johnny was sharing that poem of Yeats. That was really strong. I felt this openness to the sky. I felt this sense of, it's hard to describe, but like a universal, I could see the stars and I felt this sense of oneness almost, which I'm not going to try and rationalize what that was, because I really don't know in response to that poem why I would experience that, but I did.
It's a huge tapestry of experience, and I'm reckoning that a similar tapestry happened inside each of you. And so the question is, what do you do with it? And it really is a question, and it's not one that anyone here in the room can answer but you. However, we've got a bit more provocation for you. So thank you, Naomi. Mm-hmm. We've got 3 people. We're going to start with Hilary Gallo on the power of soft, and then he will speak briefly and pass to Katz on technology and democracy. And from Katz, we'll move finally to Ed Straw, who will speak about redesigning government. So in that spirit of anticipation that change is happening, even if we don't know in what direction, each of these people will cast a light. Thank you.
Good evening. In any negotiation or debate or conversation, what we end up doing is concentrating on the surface layer that we can see, on the logic of the conversation. What I'd like us to consider this evening is what lies beneath that. And in this debate, that was concerned with the hopes and the fears of people up and down the country. The problem with human nature is that we tend to concentrate, and we're driven by, in actuality, more of our fear than our hope. It's just the way we are. And I want to focus tonight on just picking out something about that fear and saying some things that I've found out about it. I also want to agree, or show you where I actually agree, with one of the politicians who resigned over the Brexit affair. Now, I started my career as a lawyer. So one of the things that I was trained in, and I got very good at, was supporting an argument for a client. I was very good at taking a position, at doing what we're coming to call at the moment redlining things, and fighting for that and defending it. I was a strong proponent of the I am right, you are wrong way of thinking. And that served me very well as a lawyer. What happened to me is I got out of the legal practice, as it were, and I started to negotiate things for organizations. And I found when I was trying to do deals, I needed to bring people together. And those skills that I had divided people. They were no good in the real world because I needed to bring people together. And I had a bit of an epiphany. I realized that I had to change my model. And I realized what many wise people, some wise people at least, have known all along, which is the power of really engaging of listening, of understanding, of showing empathy for someone. And for myself, having some flexibility in how my needs were met. So not having a fixity of position, so I could be more flexible. And I'm still on that journey. I'm writing about it now, and I'm still learning how to do that day on day and getting better at it. And what I realized was the value I had, and the thing I want to deliver back into the world now, if you like, is not just that thing about how you do this. It's also an understanding of why I was such a hard ass in the first place. Because it's all very well to expose these softer qualities, but we need to help people to stop being so bloody hard all the time. And a wise friend, it really angered me for a while that I couldn't really sometimes understand why, when I was in a negotiation, people were still being so difficult and tough. And somebody asked me to characterize this. They said, Hilary, what character could you put to this? And I was straight on it. For me, that character was Punch, out of Punch and Judy. And this is where I agree with David Cameron. It's the one place, I think, but it's somewhere I agree with David Cameron. Because I don't know if you remember, in 2005, when David Cameron was elected Conservative Party leader, he talked about getting rid of Punch and Judy politics in Westminster. He was very strong about that. And I agree with David Cameron. I agreed with him in 2005, but the crazy thing is, it's 2016 now, and 11 years later, I'm still agreeing with him. But what's happened? I had a bit more time than David Cameron, perhaps, and I started looking at Punch and Judy. And what I realized was this show is improvised theatre. It grew up on the streets of London. It was an import originally, came here something like 350 years ago. It hasn't got a script. So what it's done is adopt what works. What an audience responds to really well gets put into the script. What they don't respond to gets lost. So it's an improvised show. And it's also a huge paradox, because I don't know if you've noticed, if you go to the seaside and watch parents and children, the parents will all be pushing their children forward to watch this show. And this is a show about a wife-beating misogynist who beats up his wife and then proceeds to pretty much dispose of his own child and then dispatch certain other characters. So it's a horrendous show. And I realized when I looked into Punch that he's driven by fear. That's what drives this character. It's all about fear. And when I come back to this Brexit question, I'm not talking about fear of losing our lives. I'm talking about fear of uncertainty. I'm talking about fear of losing something that we have or think we have. And that was what I saw up and down the country of why people voted, in many cases, for Brexit. They took a narrow thing and then they extrapolated that to a bigger reason to vote for out or for leave. So people voted because they worried about their job, they saw immigration as the cause, and that's the reason they voted. Time and again, it was fear of loss of something they had or felt they ought to have. And this is the continuing issue. And the problem with politics is politics increasingly tends to use that fear. Instead of addressing the underlying causes that are causing people to be afraid, politics tends to use it as a tool of manipulation. And it's something that eventually ends up, we've heard a lot about division. It tends to end up dividing us. And this is the problem with fear. And after the referendum result, I wondered whether the old advice, never to talk about politics or religion in certain circles, really was that smart. And I think we have a choice. We can either allow this fear and division to continue, or we can find a way to engage with people and to open their minds. This requires courage, curiosity, and compassion. But it's the surest way to, instead of dividing people, to bring them together. And I'd like to recommend that to you as a way forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know very much at all about politics, but I do know a lot about people and quite a lot about digital. And I'm going to explain why I think we need to redesign political systems for the 21st century in an era where constant change is the new normal. I've spent my career figuring out how to get people who need to talk to each other, talking to each other and listening to each other, sometimes using digital, sometimes not. It's really, really hard. So for loads and loads of years, I just tried things out, and I figured out some things worked and some things didn't work, and I learned from the experiences, and eventually you get better and better at building bridges. And then actually, after hearing Mark Earle's talk, I started to realize that if you understand the human brain a bit better, if I understood the human brain a bit better, I could learn how to overcome barriers better. And the more that I learn about the human brain, the more I understand the complexity of the challenge that we're going through. The world is changing at an unprecedented rate, and it's not going to slow down anytime soon. I firmly believe that the digital technologies that are driving this change can be a key to a more connected, collaborative, equitable world. But we are battling against a smorgasbord of cognitive presets that mean that we automatically resist changing and listening and collaborating and even respecting the way that other people are. And the more I figure out more about the brain, the way the brain works, I think that the way that we have done things up till now are fundamentally broken. I think we need to change the way we change. I want to stop for a second, and I want to ask you to remember the last time that you had change done to you. It really doesn't feel very nice, does it? And that's because we're hardwired to resist having change done to them. We're hardwired to resist change. Our decisions are based on subconscious drivers that mean that we will do anything in our power to guarantee that things remain the same. Coping with this constant change is rubbing against a deeply ingrained adversity. Every time that we have change forced upon us, we go into fight or flight mode. It makes us anxious and stressed and uncollaborative. It even affects the way that we feel. It affects our immune system. And then there's the confirmation bias. We like things that confirm our own worldview, and we dismiss anything, naturally, that questions them. We don't listen because we're hardwired to think our own ideas are the best ideas. We don't connect because we're hardwired to stick with our own kind. Oxytocin bonds us to our gang of like-minded folk. It provokes this defensive aggression towards people who think and act differently. And we have an inbuilt aversion to using products and knowledge and policy that are developed outside of our gang. We place disproportionately high value on things that we have helped create. It's called the IKEA effect. And again, the same thing goes with policies and ideas and strategies. Having skin in the game makes people feel more attached to and protective of solutions. And yet we continue to force change on people rather than working with them. So my company works with global organizations, and big companies have realized that they need to drive efficiency and productivity. And they know to do that, they need to get people collaborating and sharing and accepting each other's ways of being. It's really hard, but we figured out a way that works. First of all, senior leadership have to fully buy into a different way of doing things. They have to be prepared to shift from command, control, and mandate to listen, learn, and engage. A series of conversations and peer recommendations help us to identify what we call change agents. influencers in different departments at different levels and different brands in different regions. Every change initiative provides a reason to bring these change agents together to co-create solutions. Thank you. This collaborative design process lets them get to know each other by working together on something eventually they start to trust each other. As part of the design process, because they've been part of the design process, they then feel an affinity to the solution. Remember the IKEA effect, and we always think that our own ideas are the best ideas. So then, once we've found our change agents, we've brought them together, we then give them platforms so they can continue to communicate and nurture networks of trust. We call the process people-powered transformations. Enterprises are realizing that top-down command and control is not the best way to get the best out of people. If people-powered transformation works for global enterprises, and it does work, couldn't we do something similar across the nation? Couldn't we identify regional and local and national change agents and use every single challenge as an opportunity to bring them together to co-create solutions? Could we provide platforms that allow change agents to share challenges and opportunities and learnings? Could we start to develop national networks of real trust at a time when trust in government is at a record all-time low? I suppose the real question is, how can we persuade leadership to shift from command and control and mandate to listen and learn and engage? Thank you.
Our final contributor of the evening.
I brought the axe this evening. But I think I'm here today because I've experienced government from every angle. And it's taken me 35 years to have reached the conclusions I'm going to speak on. So let's start with a scenario. Let's say in 2 or 3 years' time, Brexit is revoted, and we wake up on the 5th of September 2018 to find this time it's Remain. How do we feel? Relief? Pleasure? And? Okay, a bad thing has stopped from happening, but is any good occurring? Will most government decisions still be made on the same post-factual basis as was the referendum? I've seen it, and it's worse than you may think. Will we still be liable to the tyranny of the majority, as in the referendum, and to the tyranny of the minority, as with first-past-the-post voting? Will the major concerns of Brexit voters have at least been alleviated? Will successive governments be continuing the zigzag of policy making with all the disruption and waste that entails? Will the bankers have returned to planet Earth? This cartoon, which I hope you can see by Martin Rowson, and it starts with Magna Carta and it gradually goes round the corner, it's declined. This is our biggest problem. Will it still be like this? This is the bollocks of a system of government that has led to the gross inequality, that led to Brexit, that led to holding the referendum, that allowed it to be conducted on the basis of the largest pile of nonsense ever assembled to make a decision, and that permanently splits the country. Remain and rot, or it's not just about stay, it's about stay and change. And I think the time is ripe. It's termed a democratic moment, as I'm sure many people know. And it was after the disbelief and concern that the silver lining of Brexit I woke to, which Naomi referred to, it's thrown everything up in the air. It may be bad, but by God, this is an opportunity. Suddenly, we've had an outbreak of mass political education. People are talking about everything, from how to run an intelligent referendum, to digital democracy and scrapping top management bonus schemes. People even started to mention the C word. You know, the other C word where people fall asleep, the Constitution. And as Gandhi said when asked what he thought of British civilization, I look forward to it. So I look forward to a British Constitution. 700 years of parliamentary democracy, and this is the decrepit shambles that says it runs the country. It really is. I've seen so many good and not so good people clamber up the slippery poles to get into the palace, itself literally and symbolically slipping into the mud. It's only after being in government for a few years, struggling to achieve any beneficial change, that some of them realise that it's the system that's holding them and us back. The more perceptive, of course, then retire and write their memoirs of regret. If you or I, or indeed Jeremy Corbyn, were in this system, we would be as shambolic as those there now. It's the system, not the people. So if we really want to persuade Brexiteers to change their minds, to bind the country together and to win, then the campaign has to be more than stay. It has to be stay and change the system that has caused many of the problems in the first place. So what would a functioning system look like? How would this cartoon get redrawn? The system of government has never, ever been designed. No one has ever stepped back and said, if we want power and wealth distributed fairly between people, between regions, between generations, what would government look like? If we want really good schools and health services everywhere, what would their governance look like? And by the way, would party politics have a part in them or not? If we want to design out preferential lobbying, what would that take? I've proposed a new design, and copies of my book are freely available at the back of the hall, which you're welcome to take. Just read the first few pages and pages 151 to 171 for the quick way in. And we could start from there and develop or change that proposal, or from somewhere else. But, and this is where the axe comes out, all right? This needs a bloody axe taken to it. It needs striking down, and we need to design and invent something else. It's bust, it's not an option, it's a shower. So starting tomorrow, let's get stuck in, first of all, to build the electoral alliance to secure proper proportional representation, which is the essential first step to open up the whole schmoddles. And yes, let's campaign. No dust plus PR. And let's design and make our platform stay and change. Thank you.
Open mic.
Does anybody have any questions?